Hey everyone, this is Libertarian Black Man. Unions did not create the middle class. This is one of the greatest myths that the progressive movement has used to try to shore up support for the unions, trying to link their rise to the rise of the middle class. But the facts do not bear that out if you look at the history. Now here's the reason why the facts do not back up the union argument, because if you look at the middle class throughout the last few generations, it has been declining. But what's most important is what's in this chart here with these colors here. And I'm going to zoom in and show you what I see here and what I see in another chart that I will show you in a second. The yellow bars here represent the percentage of Americans who are in the middle income bracket, meaning in the middle class. Back in 1971, 61% of Americans lived in the middle class, and it has declined to the low 50s during the 2010s. But it was 61% in 1971. So in the early 70s, the middle class peaked, and we then start to see a drop off in the percent of Americans in the middle class. And what explains this is not the decline in membership of the unions, although you would not know that if you looked at some of the data available. This chart is actually very convincing to a lot of people because they don't know what the real facts are on the decline of the middle class. They look at things like this red line, which is the union membership rate, and they see that it goes from the late 60s to today. It's been in decline for the last 50 years. Then they look at the blue line, which represents middle class share of aggregate income, and that's been declining over the same period. So they say, oh, the red line is causing the blue line. The decline in unions is responsible for the decline in the middle class. It's a very convincing argument, again, if you don't know the facts or the history. What people need to know is that here is 1971 right here. Now, if you follow the chart from 1971 up to where you hit the line, you'll notice that the red line representing the union membership rate is only at about 27%. So in 1971, 61%, if we just look at that chart from earlier, 61% of Americans were in the middle class in 1971. However, only 27% of Americans were in a union during that same year. So the vast majority of Americans who were in the middle class were not in a union. Only 27% of Americans were in a union in 1971. 61% of Americans were in the middle class. So most of the people who were in a middle class were not even in a union. What explains that? Industrial productivity and marketplace competition are responsible for creating the middle class, because most industries, again, were not unionized, and yet most people were in the middle class. So how is it that industrial productivity and marketplace competition created the middle class? What we have to do is look at how industrial productivity works. So technology and investment allow businesses to become more efficient in creating products. Efficiencies reduce costs and lead to lower prices. Cheaper products allow consumers to make more purchases, and as consumers buy more, businesses are able to earn more and have the revenues to support middle class income. So technology is really what creates the wealth to produce a middle class. Unions do not create wealth at all, because unions do not produce anything. All they do is try to siphon off wealth that is being produced by industry. So you have employees who organize and try to use contracts and use strikes and use other ways of trying to muscle the hand of industry to give them more in terms of pay and benefits. But they don't actually produce any wealth. They just have to try to force the hand of those who do produce wealth. So we can't credit unions. They have no ability to create a middle class because they don't make anything. Unions always came after industry. Industry comes first. And then workers who are not satisfied with working conditions and pay and hours and so on will then try to gain some of the wealth that the industry is producing. But without the wealth, it doesn't matter if you have a union or not. If there's no wealth being produced, there will be no money to finance what unions want to finance. So you can't credit the unions for creating wealth, because that's not what they do, and they can't. It's not even in their ability to create wealth. They can only try to get a piece of what someone else has produced. Marketplace competition is the other piece of this. And the way it works is dissatisfaction by employees with pay rates and working conditions lead to high absenteeism and turnover. Turnover raises productivity costs through hiring and training new employees, along with lost productivity of non-present workers. So higher costs as a result reduce profits and incentivize businesses to create employee compensation and benefit packages. With this, incomes rise, benefits rise, and people start moving from the lower to middle income tiers, those especially in the fastest growing and most competitive industries. This is marketplace competition's role in creating the middle class. You can have a very wealthy company, a very wealthy industry, but competition is what incentivizes businesses who might not be compensating employees enough to raise pay, because if they don't raise pay, employees will quit their jobs for another company who will hire them for a better package. So it's competition and productivity in the marketplace and in industry that creates the middle class. All we need to do is look at an example from the past. Ford Motor Company, between the years of 1913 and 1926, showed every single one of these aspects in action. So they invested in assembly line technology. This helped them produce automobiles more efficiently. As a result, the cost of a car fell, prices fell, and profits rose. Employee turnover began to go up as a result of the assembly line, because it began to make work more tedious, more monotonous, because it would require you to stand in one location all day and do the same thing over and over again, making work more repetitive and causing employees to burn out faster. And this ended up resulting in production costs rising, because employees their absenteeism and turnover rate would rise. So wages were upped by more than double. Back in the mid-1910s, we saw manufacturing wages averaging $2.30 a day. Ford introduced the $5 a day wage, which doubled what was expected in the manufacturing wage area. And this caused turnover to end and costs to plummet and profits to soar. Then the 40-hour work week was introduced, because in fact workers were becoming more productive with the assembly line and also with other technologies. Plus, without the turnover, people were able to produce more, because now you have employees who are committed to working and they're just producing more efficiently as a result. First, people were working 9 hours a day, 6 days a week. As the productivity of Ford Motor Company became better, the number of hours in the day were cut from 9 to 8, and then the number of days per week was cut from 6 to 5. So the 40-hour work week comes in 1926, and other industries followed Ford's example by adopting the assembly line to produce other products that they were making. And they became more efficient and more productive, and competed against each other and raised wages and benefits, and before you know it, you've got a middle class established, because multiple industries come together, not come together in any collusionary sense, but they come together in the way that they do business. They start adopting the same technologies, and they start providing the same pay packages to keep workers from quitting. So Ford did not create the middle class, but the Ford Motor Company was a leader in getting other businesses to follow his example, which would then create the middle class as more businesses started to do what Ford began earlier in the 20th century. This is where the middle class came from: productivity and competition. Even progressive outlets like NPR, National Public Radio, did an article on the 100th anniversary of the $5 a day wage back in 2014, giving some credit to Henry Ford. Not necessarily saying that he created the middle class, but saying that he sparked a revolution in industry that led to the formation of the middle class. Again, this is NPR. And NPR is very progressive. They are, just pushing for more government involvement in our lives. But they understand that you need productivity in industry to create wealth so that middle class money can be available. And then you need competition, which helps redistribute the wealth created by industry to workers. It's productivity and competition, not unions, that created the middle class, which again shows why the majority of people who were in the middle class in the early 70s were not in a union. We never had more than 35% of Americans in a union at any time in history, but we did have more than half of Americans in the middle class for much of the post-World War II era, and it did not begin declining until the 1970s. And of course, lots of reasons for that. We went off the gold standard, which devalued the currency. It declined investment, made it more expensive to do business here. Businesses started leaving the country, making it more difficult for unions to organize. We started to see more regulations come in. Again, regulations and devalued money hurt investment. They hurt the ability of people to save. They hurt the ability of people to produce value in the economy. And as a result, our economy grows slower. Businesses are more willing to leave the country. Unions have less power. But if you look at all these things together, it looks like, hey, decline of unions equals decline of middle class. It's the decline of economic productivity and the lack of competition due to regulations that have come in: banking regulations, environmental regulations, tax regulations, and so many others. Thousands, if not millions, of regulations by the federal government as well as state and local governments over industry have led to a lack of productivity in our economy, which is why our debt is higher than ever. Private debt, public debt, household debt, entitlement debt. It's at record highs. We are not a productive economy anymore. Even though we have better technology now than ever before, we're producing less because we are regulating ourselves too much with government. We're devaluing the currency. We're making it buy less by printing money, by having banks lend out too much money. And altogether, it's a perfect storm for the decline of the middle class. If we do not fix this situation, then we will continue to see what we've been seeing: a decline in the middle class and a misunderstanding that it's the result of unions declining instead of government policy. I wrote this book and published it last year, Say No to Big Government, My Case for Maximum Freedom. It's on Amazon for $18. Please grab a copy. I not only explain the decline of the middle class, but I explain how we can revive the middle class. We have to look at government policy. There's too much taxation and regulation and devaluation of our currency going on that is responsible for this. So please get a copy of my book, Say No to Big Government. I don't just talk about the middle class. I talk about how the government is ruining everybody's lives in an attempt to try to create a perfect nation by regulating and taxing and spending money on all the areas that it claims to try to improve. So get a copy. Amazon, $18. Say No to Big Government. Share this book, share this video with everyone you know. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, Libertarian Black Man. Follow us on Twitter at Libertarian Black Man, and we hope to see you in the next video.